Hi there, I'm Joe York and I'm recording this on the 15th of October and I'm in my studio in North Yorkshire, which is in the north of the UK, and it's a pretty wet and miserable kind of a day here, the sort of weather we get a lot in this country. In the autumn, it's just a bit grey and miserable. So I'm very happy to be making this recording for Art by Artists. Okay, so I'm a painter, mainly. I'm not from North Yorkshire. I was born in London and from a family that loved books and music and art. My mum listened to opera. She was, a super mad opera fan, and my dad was heavily into jazz. And as a child, if I sat kind of halfway up the stairs, my dad would be working upstairs with jazz on, my mum would be downstairs with opera, and you kind of got blitzed by a weird mix of both halfway up the stairs. So that was quite interesting. My dad was actually quite a famous cartoonist in the 1960s. He worked on what were then called strip cartoons, story cartoons. It was a big discipline. He had to have one for every single day of the year pretty much, and had to be at least a month in advance, and it was hard work actually. They were in like major newspapers and syndicated all over the world and stuff. So it was a big deal, and he worked incredibly hard. In those days, he needed to be close enough to a place called Fleet Street in London, which is where the newspapers were based originally before that all changed. And he used to have to go in and drop work off regularly. Family holidays were down on the Sussex coast, and he just carried on working actually, but just in a different place. He'd just have a bit of a mess around on the beach every now and then, and quick pause for a cup of tea, which definitely fueled him, and then he'd be back to work. So I have very fond memories of those early days, because he died quite suddenly. Very suddenly actually, when I was about 11, just 11, and things did get quite complicated because he was a freelance artist, and so I guess we didn't really know what we were going to live on for a while. It was quite tricky, and my mum struggled massively, and my brother had quite severe learning disabilities and autism, which was much less understood in those days, and so my childhood got it got a bit tricky from then. I had a lot of responsibility very early. I did a lot of caring for my brother and my mum, really, looking back, but I absolutely loved school actually, and it was my refuge. So I loved it. I loved learning. I loved reading, drawing, painting, anything art-wise, and also increasingly loved the peace and mental space of walking. That became very important to me quite early on, and we had a family dog at that point, so I would take on the job of walking him, and it was the thing that I really loved, just getting out into the countryside and being in fresh air, in open space, and I guess having some time to myself, which I probably didn't get a lot of at home, I suppose. We'd moved out to Sussex by then. If you're not from the UK, that's right down on the south coast of England. It was then quite rural. It's not actually far from London, but it was It was a rural place sandwiched between between the South Downs, which are these lovely kind of rolling hills, and the sea. And so I did spend a whole lot of time just out walking, really, and mucking around outside and absorbing that. And I think at the time I didn't know how important it was to me, but I've realised since it really is. Just getting out and walking is still a big part of my life and my artistic practice too. And I'm sure that my fascination for landscape kind of dates back to then. I went on to do a degree in art. My specialism was illustration within a kind of graphic design field. And then I did a postgraduate in art and design education. I loved art history. That was a big part of everything I was doing, even put a lot of time into that in terms of my study time too, where I had the flexibility. And I became a teacher actually after uni. I think I always had a bit of an interest in teaching and passing stuff on, just supporting and sort of sharing, and it came quite naturally to me, and I loved it. So I taught in high schools and became a head of department and, did all of that, and particularly just loved teaching art. Found it the most fascinating thing to teach. Loved working with students. I particularly loved sixth formers. Weirdly, I'm so happy that I'm still in touch with some of my former students many years on, particularly my former sixth form students. And it's just great to see what they've done in their lives and how they've developed and what they've gone on to do. That's just brilliant. And teaching has been and always will be, I think, a big part of my life. I had a family. I had one son. My husband and I got one son, and I always managed to keep my own art practice going. So I did quite a lot of work in illustration, even some quite technical illustration. And I also did a lot of surface pattern design, working for a Swiss company that designed fabrics, silk fabrics particularly. So I did a lot of work designing for them. And then over time, I got back into education more and became an education consultant. And I was working with schools and networks of schools and colleges, basically to support and develop learning and teaching in art and design and arts education too. So a little bit of music and dance and drama too. And I really genuinely absolutely loved every minute of all of that. But I think, gradually come to realise I needed to put some time into my own practice, my own work. So some proper time, not just fitting round kind of other work commitments. So eventually I bit the bullet, which I guess was about 10 years ago. And I decided to focus pretty much solely on my own work. Having said that, I still do a bit of coaching. I coach some emerging artists, and I also run the odd course. I still enjoy doing that. So I probably only do a couple a year. At the moment, I'm particularly loving, I do some courses for Lund Studios, which are up here in North Yorkshire, and it's just a brilliant place. It's a lovely gallery and workshop space, and it's just a fabulous place to run workshops. So I really enjoy doing that. But my main emphasis now is on, just developing my own practice. I've recently set up an artist support group in the area with a great friend of mine, Julia Poulton, who's also an artist, painter. That's a nice thing. And other than that, I am really focusing on my own stuff, which is great. I guess my biggest influences, if I'm thinking about those, it's quite hard because I'm really passionate about art history, and I've also taught art history a lot, and so actually I'm very interested in most kind of art movements and styles and periods, but I suppose I keep coming back to a few key ones, and my most important influences would be people like J.M.W. Turner. I love Braque, actually. Some women artists. I love Gwen John, who doesn't get the coverage and kind of respect that she probably deserves, or definitely deserves. Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham, I love her work. Peter Lanyon, Ben Nicholson, in fact all the St Ives artists. Again, for people not in the UK, they were a group of artists who kind of congregated round the St Ives area of Cornwall back in the sort of late 50s and 60s, and made some amazing and groundbreaking work and had links with artists all over the world. Rothko came over from the US to visit them, and they were a huge deal actually, and their work I still find absolutely fascinating. And a particular painter I love, who wasn't really in the St Ives group, but he was kind of on the edge of it and knew them all, and that was a guy called Paul Feiler, who actually came from Germany, and I just admire him terrifically. If you don't know his work, look it up. He died not all that many years ago, sadly, but he was in his 90s, and he had worked right through till the end, making new and exciting work, pretty much till the day he died. And I just find that so impressive. I really do. Look up Paul Feiler. He did some amazing stuff. My current work is pretty much all landscape inspired then, because I've got this fascination with walking, I think, and the kind of physical need to have that rhythm of walking through the landscape pretty much every day. I think the fact that I work mostly from landscape is sort of inevitable. It's part of who I am, I think, and what I need to do. So my work really comes from walking. Sometimes I feel a bit of a fraud, because there's a lot of artists who will kind of sit outside in all weathers. Turner would be a fabulous example of being, tied to a mast in a storm and all of that. So I feel a bit of a fraud because I don't actually work outside very much. I take a lot of photographs, and I do paint outside a bit, but mostly they're small sketches and little tiny paintings in sketchbooks that become jumping off points for bigger pieces. The photos are weird because I never really paint from photos. I think that I've worked out what they're doing is they're helping me to remember and to frame the things I've seen and the sort of, I guess, the compositions that are interesting me. And they might be details. In North Yorkshire we have a lot of dry stone walls and moss and the kind of paraphernalia of hill farming, all that sort of thing. And I often take photos of close-ups of those. And then there'll be photos of big open landscapes, which is really what I love to paint. My paintings are not detailed now. Funnily enough, when I was illustrating, I was doing work that was incredibly detailed and very kind of technical in that way, very accurate observational work. But over time, I've found that although I can do this, it's not something that excites me or challenges me. So what I'm doing these days is something that's abstracting from the landscape. And I'm working from memory anyway. As I say, I'm not working outside very much. Mostly I'm studio based. And I'm working from a memory of the feeling of being out in a landscape at a particular time, in whatever the weather was, in whatever the light was. Sometimes I'm walking in low cloud. I'm quite high up here, and the cloud can be so low that as you're walking you can taste the moisture in your mouth as you're moving along. So the challenge of abstraction is the thing that really is getting me, I guess. That's the thing that I really enjoy. And the particular focus I have at the moment is on a kind of atmospheric abstraction, which is all about that feeling of being in the landscape, a sort of sensory memory, associations to a sense of place and of what's been there before and who's trodden those paths before. And I'm not literally painting these things. I'm not painting charcoal burners who are in the wood down the way from me hundreds of years ago, but I feel like some of that memory, some of that sense of place, it comes through in what I'm doing. Well, I hope so anyway. So what are the things that I'm particularly focusing on? There's a definite rhythm to art making, and at the moment where I am in that kind of cycle, which is sort of thinking about work, planning it, making it, exhibiting it, getting it out to galleries, promoting it, all that. So there's a natural cycle to the whole thing. And at the moment, I'm very much in the beginning of a period of studio time and thinking time and really working out what I'm going to do next, which is always a bit scary, but also exciting. So I'm giving myself a bit of time and space to plan new work and directions and to kind of play, really, to experiment and to see where things are going to take me. I think there'll be, along similar lines, but I don't know yet. I'm sure they'll develop and evolve, and probably still be landscape based, but you never know. So, being an artist is not a straightforward thing. The challenges are actually quite considerable. People do tend to see art and being an artist as just making art, and it's so much more than that. And it does have other challenges too. It can be a really isolating thing, because you do tend to be pretty much on your own in your studio making your work, and everything kind of comes from within. So you've got a lot going on, and you need to have the sort of headspace to think creatively, as it's all got to come from within. And there are times when that's tricky, so that's a challenge. It takes a while too. It takes a while to find your own rhythm, your own way of working. It takes a while to create your own studio practice, really, that works for you. And there's just so much more to the business of being a working artist. There's loads of background stuff, researching, managing materials, ordering materials, equipment, preparing canvases, all that kind of stuff. Waxing, varnishing, finishing work, titling work, managing your archive, talking to galleries, working with galleries and clients, publicising your work using social media. There's just a heck of a lot to juggle, actually. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges, actually. And my biggest advice to anybody else kind of starting out would be to seek out other artists, which is something I've always done. I think I mentioned before, I've just started a local artist group for working artists, and I think it's a really important thing. I think it really helps to have other people you can talk to who are doing similar things, whether it's actually in person or whether you do it online or via Zoom or whatever. It's just a really good thing to do. So seek out the other artists in your area, and make those links and friendships. It's a brilliant thing. It really is. One of the questions you've asked is what advice I'd give to my younger self, and I have to say I find this really tricky. It's hard because, in a way, you just have to go through your life and do the best you can at any one point. So I don't know that advice from an older version of yourself is necessarily very helpful. But I think the thing I would say is that I wish I'd followed my own road a bit more in the early days. I'm really happily doing that and have done for a long time now, but I was very heavily advised, and I was still, at school, at high school, very much pushed towards doing illustration as a degree. I think people just thought it was a kind of a safer career option, really, than being a fine artist. And I did enjoy my course, and I found so much of it useful, particularly actually in my teaching career. So I don't regret it for a moment. But honestly, I should have done fine art, and had I stuck to my guns a bit more, I think I would have done, and that would have been a good thing. Materials-wise, I probably ought to say a bit about that. So my work at the moment mostly involves, it's pretty much all painting, and I use a range of things, but I particularly use acrylics, and I also use oils with cold wax medium. Acrylics, I guess I love. They take a lot of getting used to, I think, actually. But the reason I love them so much is because they dry really fast. And I love to work in layers. I love to build up lots and lots and lots of layers, by which I mean, some paintings will have 30, 40 more layers in them without exaggeration. And they can be, sometimes they're translucent layers that, barely detectable, but, a translucent glaze over an opaque area or a textured area does so much to kind of modulate how you see that, to adjust the softness or hardness, or pare back or enhance the texture, or increase the tonal quality, or it's so much you can do with layers. And I love layers, and I kind of feel I'm working with layers in the landscape and layers in paint too, so there's a sort of logic in my head about that as well. I do love oil and cold wax. I'm quite asthmatic. I'm an allergic. Not very good for a landscape painter. I have really bad hay fever, so I'm very allergic, and my asthma is very allergic too. So oils can be a challenge. So I pretty much restrict using them to the summer months, when I can have the studio doors and windows open, and they don't have so much of a bad effect on me. Tools wise, I have a selection of tools. I love big juicy brushes. I tend to like flat brushes rather than round or filberts or anything like that. I also love to make some tools. I make tools I can inscribe into paint or draw into paint with, often using bits of wire or things I found, bits of twig. I keep quite a lot of those, but I also like silicone blades and wedges. They're great to use. I have a lot of decorators' tools, scrapers and chisels and all kinds of plaster floats and things like that, which are lovely for getting big areas covered and moving large amounts of paint around. I also use a scalpel quite a bit, and a bradawl, a sharp pointy tool, and I use those. Oh, and an etching needle too, for making very sharp incised marks, which I use to kind of draw through the paint layers, and I do a lot of that in my work. I guess I've tried pretty much everything art materials wise. I guess I pretty much have tried everything. I used to write a regular column, an art blog for a big art manufacturer, which used to go out all over Europe. So I would have to test new materials and kind of demonstrate them and write up how they worked and what they were best for and all that sort of thing. So I loved doing that, actually. It was a really, really nice job to have. And the other thing it did was it gave me a massive chance to use so many different materials and techniques. So it was actually a really useful job to have. When I'm in my studio, I sometimes I like it quiet. I'm pretty lucky because it is where I am now. I look out over fields and it is pretty quiet. There'll be sheep in the fields outside. Often there's not usually very much noise at all. No traffic really. Nothing like that. So it is quiet, and that's lovely. So I can kind of have the windows open and listen to the birds, and we have skylarks and red kite flying overhead and so on. And I'm so lucky. I'm very conscious how lucky I am to have that. I do like to listen to other stuff though. I like to listen to all sorts of things. It depends what I'm doing. If I'm at a stage of doing things like preparing canvases, gessoing, varnishing, that kind of thing, which is relatively relaxing. It's not something that you have to kind of focus on in a completely intense way. If you're doing something like that, then I often listen to podcasts. I like art podcasts, and I like quite a lot of podcasts actually, all sorts of different things. So I listen to those. If I'm painting, it's much more likely to be music. I have to be careful. It can't really be, I've learnt over the years, it can't really be sort of music with lyrics. It pretty much has to be just sound. Because if I've got too much lyric, it's like spoken word. I can't get in the flow of painting. So it could be anything from jazz to classical to rock to any kind of music really. I'm quite into Nordic jazz at the moment, so I might have some of that on. I try and fit it to the kind of mood, because I find I get into I start to paint in the rhythm of whatever I'm listening to. So I do have to be careful about that, because I don't want to be listening to something too fast and furious when I'm trying to do a painting that's kind of really calm and still. So yeah, you have to match what you're listening to what you're doing. One of the best things about being a painter or being an artist in any form is having people like your work, having their reactions, seeing how they react to your work. And it's just brilliant when they buy something because they just love it and they want to live with it. And there's really not much to beat that in terms of work. So I've been very lucky. I've had some brilliant responses. A lot of people have said wonderful things about what my work means to them and how much they love pieces that they've bought. And often, I mean, they can be anything from little tiny drawings that they've bought direct from me, or big paintings that they bought from galleries. I recently completed a commission, and commission paintings can be a bit interesting because they're nerve-wracking. You never really know how people will feel. But I recently completed this one and delivered it in person, and the client was over the moon, and she told me how she keeps going back to it and looking at it in different light and seeing how it changes. And so yeah, that's really special. And that's kind of the big thing about having somebody love your work. It's great. It really is. I kind of hope people do understand the love and care that goes into making work. And I hope it makes them feel something in a small way, and in some way actually brightens or enriches their daily lives. I guess that's what I hope for people looking at my work or living with my work. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about what I do, and I'd love you to, it would be great. I have a website which is www.joyorkart.co.uk, and I'm Jo York Art on Instagram, and I currently have work in a number of galleries, and you can find them all online, and they're all listed on my website. And yeah, I really appreciate this opportunity. I think this is a really great project actually, and I hope loads of people listen to it, and it's a great platform for lots of different types of artists. Okay, bye for now.